Wakey wakey sleepyheads, I'm Braden IRL, and today let's get smart. Happy New Year everyone! It's really hard to believe that it's 2019 already. It's kind of weird how time can fly so fast. And speaking of a new year, New Year's resolutions seem to be a common thing this time around. I'm not super big about them because I like to define my yearly goals with more emphasis on the progress, what I need to do to achieve those goals. And that brings me into SMART goals, which you might have heard of before, but they're this kind of guide that allows you to set more realistic, more practical goals, with emphasis on the progress, what you need to do to get to those goals. With all this goal setting going around, I think it's always good to review how to make a good goal for yourself. So let's go over how to make a SMART goal for school specifically. And I'll start with a long-term goal that I set for myself for fall quarter, which was get better grades. I feel like it might be obvious, but each letter in the word SMART actually stands for something, and each of these capacities will help us make a more defined goal. So let's start with the letter S, which stands for specific. Specific just means to be specific, just be more specific with what you want to do with your goal and what exactly you're trying to achieve. So saying something like get better grades isn't specific enough because it's just like health code grades or like grades in math. For me, I wanted to get better grades in physics, and I could specify a little more as to what class I want to get better grades in because I had to take more than 2 physics classes. But for me, being a little broad with that is good enough. So, get better grades in physics classes. M stands for measurable, which means having some sort of indicator by which you can measure your progress of achieving that goal. For something like school, I feel like the most obvious indicator would be grades. And unfortunately, the most obvious indicator for this kind of goal would be the final grade that you get at the end of the class. But that's okay. So for this goal, I could say something like, get at least a B- in my physics classes, specifically because the lowest grade I've gotten in a physics class was a C+, and I obviously want to get better than that to raise my GPA. So there you go, that's some sort of indicator that I can use to measure my progress. A stands for Achievable, which means how am I going to achieve this goal? Meaning that hopefully you're setting a goal that's pretty realistic for yourself, which means I shouldn't be saying something like, I'm going to get an A+ in physics, because that's probably not going to happen very easily. For me, the way I was going to achieve my goal of getting at least a B- in my physics classes was doing weekly studying, along with making sure I get above average scores on my midterms, which is another way to measure my progress on getting the goal. So now the goal is get at least a B- in my physics classes by weekly studying and getting above average scores on my midterms. R stands for relevant, and it's kind of sidetracking from specifying the specific goal because it makes you think, is this goal what I want to focus on right now? Maybe I want to focus on a different goal that's now becoming relevant to me. Maybe hanging out with my friends more, maybe learning a new hobby or a language, or maybe focusing on my extracurriculars, YouTube, things like that. For now, I think focusing on my grades in my physics classes is pretty relevant enough, especially since I'm a third year, so I'm going to stick with that because relevance. The last letter T stands for time-bound, because most all goals kind of have a restriction as to how long you can do things until you reach that goal. For this specifically, I only have 1 quarter or 11 weeks to get this goal of getting a good grade in this class or classes. So I should use that in mind because by having a time restriction, it kind of makes you realize that you can't really procrastinate and that you have to do things like, I need to study every week and I need to make sure I do it every week because I only have 11 weeks. That'll really fly by because I'm doing other things during the quarter. And so my final refined long-term goal for fall quarter would have been get at least a B- in my physics classes by the end of fall quarter by weekly studying so that I can also get above average scores on my midterms. Aside from these long-term goals that we might set for ourselves for a quarter, for the whole academic year, for a few years, we might also want to set some short-term goals, for example during a really short study session for like even half an hour, 1 hour, 2 hours. By adding a goal to our study session, which seems kind of weird, we add some specificity, some structure to what we're doing so we don't procrastinate, so we don't end up doing nothing that's really productive at all, so that we're motivated to actually have some sort of progress by the end of it. For example, a lot of short-term goals that I would have had during fall would be do my history readings. But we could obviously use the SMART goal capacities to refine it a little more. I could be saying instead, I'm going to skim one chapter of this specific history reading by the end of this 30-minute study session with active reading notes. There, I specified that I'm doing one specific chapter of the reading, that I'm going to be doing active reading notes to show that I'm actually getting something from the reading, and that is kind of restricted by the 30 minutes I have for this time session. Keep in mind that you should adjust your own goals based on how you can handle things and based on how much time you might have left. If I was, say, during a history reading the day of, which may or may not have happened this past quarter, I might do something like, I'm just going to skim every topic sentence of every paragraph only, so that way I can get the main ideas of every paragraph. That's a way to adjust a short-term goal, because I don't exactly have enough time to skim through an entire reading. Additionally, your goals and how you'll achieve these goals will differ based on what class you're taking, on all the extracurriculars you're trying to juggle. So it's just kind of figuring out what you need to do, because my experiences are more science-based, so I can't really speak on making goals for things like even biology or like English, history, all those other classes that I don't usually take. Speaking of which, I know I need to set goals actually for winter quarter, so what I like to do is reflect on old goals that I've made, like for example the ones I made for fall quarter, think about if I made them, if I achieved them, if I only made it part way through them, and if I need to readjust them and postpone them to the following quarter. And of course, if there's something new that comes up that I want to focus on, then I'll use the SMART goals to create something new that I can focus on. Finally, because making a SMART goal is a pretty big thing, there's so much to remember, I've linked a resource down in the description which kind of outlines everything about a SMART goal, how to make one, what each of the letters stand for, so you can just go ahead and check that out. That's all I have to share about goal setting, everyone. I hope you found this information about SMART goals helpful. Maybe you want to create a SMART goal, or maybe you've thought about refining one of the goals you've already made for the new year. If you have any questions, feel free to hit me up. If you want to share some of your goals because I want to see what kind of things you want to do for the new year, feel free to let me know too. Other than that, that's all for now, everyone. I'll see you all next time. Until then, nighty night.